The downfal of the Eastern State Penitentiary.
The Eastern State Penitentiary, established in October 1829 in Philadelphia, was a prison designed to inspire regret in the inmates. The solitary confinement system was a triumph to be used in many future prisons. The long and tragic downfall began with riots in 1933, which ultimately closed the prison in 1971.
The penitentiary was a new kind of prison. A penitentiary was a place that inspired true regret or penitence, hence the name penitentiary. Designed by the Quakers, the solitary system was supposed to give inmates time to think about their wrongdoings. It was also going to reduce the overcrowded environment in other prisons of the day. Prisoners of all ages, genders, and sentences were put in solitary cells where they stayed 23 hours a day.
Previously, prisons were simply a place to hold wrongdoers. People with all different crimes were put in the same room and left to themselves to fight, while guards rarely did anything but physically abused and harm prisoners.
In these prisons, red thieves were held together with the murderers and arsonists. Rape and robbery were common occurrences. A group of men, including Benjamin Franklin, called the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, saw the awful conditions of the jails and decided to do something about it. The chosen architect of their new prison was John Haviland.
The end result had a likeness to a fortress or castle. It had false arrow-slit windows and battlements. In addition, the building featured central heating, running water, and flush toilets. These were things that even the president at the time was not offered.
John Haviland designed the prison so that from the outside it was intimidating, like a fortress, but from the inside it was like a church, another common place of repentance.
John Haviland designed the prison to be cell blocks coming out from a central building. The cell blocks were single-story with high-arched ceilings. The cells themselves had a bed, toilet, skylight, a hole for food, and one door leading to an individual exercise yard.
The prison provided activities by which the prisoners could pass time. They were provided with the Bible for reading material, and later into the prison's development, there were competitive sports. Some guards formed bonds with the prisoners in their cell blocks. One even brought a Christmas tree and decorations from home for the prisoners to have.
The first prisoner was a thief named Charles Williams, who came on October 29, 1829. To ensure he would not be recognized by the public after he got out of prison, a potato sack was put over his head at all times out of his cell. He was also provided with shoemaking materials to pass the time. He was the first of over 80,000 inmates.
After the penitentiary received its first prisoner, they continued to finish the construction of the penitentiary. After cell block 3 was completed, they began to add to the original design to accommodate the growing number of inmates. Between the years of 1831 and 1835, construction on cell blocks 1 through 7 was completed.
One of the prison's biggest assets was their hospital ward. Inside the ward, they had operating rooms and therapy rooms, including hydrotherapy.
Many children were born in the hospital at Eastern State Penitentiary. 24 children were born in the recorded history of the penitentiary, although 12 of these children were found out just within the past few years.
The mothers of these children were not allowed to keep their children, and so women who were soon to be released kept them until their actual mother was let out.
These children were not the only ones at the penitentiary, however. Children were held at the penitentiary for a variety of crimes. These crimes included theft, arson, and murder.
The women in the prison were held along with the rest of the men in the cell blocks, but in 1923, they moved the women into a separate cell block and eventually into a new prison called Muncie Prison. The prison held many famous criminals such as Al Capone and William Sutton. They were some of the biggest factors in the triumph of the penitentiary. Supposedly, Al Capone was treated better than many other prisoners, but recent research reveals that this information was in fact false.
Soon enough, the prison started falling into disrepair, as many people, including Charles Dickens, had predicted. Dickens said in his journal, American Notes for the General Circulation, "In its intention, I am well convinced that it is kind, humane, and meant for reformation. But I am persuaded that those who devised this system of prison discipline and those benevolent gentlemen who carried it into execution do not know what it is that they are doing."
He thought that while the prison had good intentions, it was not well run and would soon fall apart. That prediction came true, although it took a good while. In 1933, the first major riot broke out. Prisoners set fires in their cells and destroyed workshops to protest insufficient recreational centers as well as overcrowding. This helped set off the tragic downfall of the Eastern State Penitentiary.
Prison riots usually consisted of setting fires in cells and escapes from cells. One instance was when a prisoner tricked a guard into giving him the cell keys, leading to release of most or all of the cell block. The prisoners then started to attack the guard with clubs and homemade tools made from scrap collected over time.
There were some major escapes during the prison's downfall as well, the most famous of which took place in July 1929, when Leo Callahan escaped with 5 other men, and was the only prisoner not to be caught again. Technically, although he would be over 100 years old today, he's still considered at large.
Another famous escape is when Willie Sutton and 11 other men dug a tunnel to escape from the prison. The penitentiary had measures in place to deal with prisoners they no longer wanted to deal with or that were getting out of control. One of those measures was a place called the Hole. It was a cell block underground with very low ceilings and poor lighting.
Death row was a place that prisoners who were sentenced to be put to death were contained. It was also known as Cell Block 15. The cell block itself was almost a separate building. It was also the first area to get electric locks. Willie Sutton himself had 5 unsuccessful escape attempts. He takes all of the credit for the tunnel escape when in reality it was Clarence Kleindienst who did all of the plotting and planning. Sutton was recaptured within minutes, but Kleindienst was able to enjoy 3 whole hours of freedom.
Another aspect of the prison's downfall was unauthorized weapons. Prisoners made weapons out of scrap that they hid in their cells. When there were riots, they would use their handmade weapons against the guards.
Prisoners often made clubs or small spears to harm the officers. During the riot in 1933, they burnt down workshops and it took 2 hours for the guards and 150 policemen to restrain the prisoners.
Another major issue the penitentiary faced was one of the issues that had been built to eliminate: overcrowding. The prison was originally intended to hold approximately 300 people. It eventually contained about 1,700 prisoners at one time, almost 6 times its original capacity. Although the prison was added to over the years, prisoners ended up doubling in rooms, and the solitary system was mostly done away with except for very high security prisons.
In 1970, it was decided that the prison could not be saved, and it was closed. The prison was too overcrowded, and the original sentiment behind the prison had been diminished to nearly nothing. Most of what had made the prison so revolutionary, such as the heating system, running water, and solitary system, had broken down or completely disappeared. In 1971, there were riots elsewhere in the city, causing them to temporarily reopen it to house prisoners.
From the years between the closing of the prison up until 1988, the prison sat and was allowed to become overgrown and broken down. There were vines throughout the prison and at least 2 visible trees. The Eastern State Penitentiary became a ruin, a skeleton of what it once was.
The tragedy the Eastern State Penitentiary stood through led to many legends surrounding the place. The prison is supposedly one of the most haunted places in America, and a haunted house is now held there every year.
The initial success of the prison led to many similar prisons being built. Millions of people have been kept in solitary confinement cells thanks to the prison, although it proved to be a bad idea that drove people mad.
Even though it has negatively affected many people, it has also helped some prisons learn from the Pennsylvania Penitentiary's mistakes. Research has been done since the prison closed. Multiple studies have been carried out, proving that isolation does more harm than good. Nowadays, solitary confinement is only used for high-security prisoners and is a temporary punishment for misbehaviors.
In conclusion, the Eastern State Penitentiary had a good run, but the system it had been built upon was greatly flawed and caused its eventual downfall. It largely shaped prisons that are run across the world.